So this idea of curiosity is a leap of faith. Curiosity, of course, killed the cat, right? That's what killed the cat. I mean, that's what we think. I was with my son, Tim, 2 weeks ago, the week after Easter. They wanted to take me to this unusual, odd music festival out in Knoxville, Tennessee. Everybody's heard of it, I'm sure. It's called the Big Ears Festival. No. You might have heard of Bonnaroo. A lot of folks have heard of Bonnaroo. And I can't remember some of the others. The same guy who does all of those major internationally known, well, South by Southwest, for example, same thing. The same guy who does those festivals around the country does Big Ears Music Festival in Knoxville simply out of his own joy, out of his own desire. It's like his little hobby. And maybe 2,000 weird, strange people come from all over the U.S. and beyond and gather for some pretty bizarre kinds of musical experiences. It's all very experimental. People like Laurie Anderson. I'm sure you all know Laurie Anderson, right? Okay. A couple of strange people. No, you know Philip Glass. You've heard of Philip Glass, the composer, the minimalist composer. He's done a lot of composing for both symphonies, orchestras, as well as movie scores. Well, they were two of the featured people, and then all sorts of obscure artists. At any rate, my kids grew up on this weirdness. And so when they heard about the festival, they said, "Dad, we want to take you there for your birthday." And so Tim and I drove out there, and then Matthew met us there, flew into Knoxville. On the way there, of course, we had this great time together, right? It's a 14-hour drive to Knoxville. So 8 hours into the drive, we're in the middle-ish of somewhere around Benton, Arkansas. And it's late in the afternoon. Sun is setting. It must be 6 o'clock or so. So that bright sun out of the west is shining as we go to the east. And these little towns are sort of almost blinded. They're illuminated by the light from that sun. And I'm a little mesmerized after 8 hours of driving on the road. And I'm just sort of keeping on I-30, trying to stay focused. When out of nowhere, Tim goes, "Warning! Prepare to meet God!" And I'm swerving off to the shoulder and back into the middle of the lane, and then suddenly I look over where Tim's pointing to the opposite side of I-30 at this billboard. "Warning, prepare to meet God." And I said, "Tim," and he said, "Well, I just thought we better be prepared. It's Arkansas. Who knows what's on the other side of that billboard?" And so, we calmed down. I calmed down. We got back on focus here. But I wanted to show this because, George Sutton, who's a retired clergy person in the Methodist Church, introduced Revelations. And it is a strange, bizarre book. And most of us are familiar with it because of the strange, bizarre things that get done with it, even 2,000 years after it's been written. And it's a curious kind of thing. It's hard to understand, but boy, do we try to make it fit in the 21st century, right? And so in the 20th century, we had all that great series, and maybe some of you loved it, maybe some of you read it. You might have read the Left Behind series. I won't ask for a show of hands. I read part of one of them, like the foreword, and then I couldn't get beyond any further. But there was a time when I was very involved in that. In fact, I used to sing Randy Newman's great song, "Left Behind." You've been left behind. Some of you all remember Randy Newman from the 70s? Larry Newman, not Randy Newman, yeah. I love Randy Newman, too. Larry Norman, yes. Thank you, Mom. Where are my interpreters? I need interpreters up here beside me, so when I say Randy Newman, Norman, okay, that's what I need up here, is that. So, Larry Norman, thank you. I've been working 20 years to block him out. I'm almost succeeded. So he had this wonderful song, "You've Been Left Behind." Some of you remember it. "Life was filled with guns and wars, and everyone got trampled on the floors." You remember. "I wish we'd all been ready." And then the chorus, "There's no time to change your mind. The sun has come, and you've been left behind." And that's what all the verses were. That was always the refrain. And then it was this ending that always got me. Of course, I sang it when I was singing it in the day, but now looking back, it's the same kind of irony that surrounds so much of this stuff. Because at the end, this whole chorus would come in. "You've been left, you've been left, you've been left behind, you've been left." And I'm thinking, okay, there's something wrong. But there's these ironies that get caught up. And I think mainly, if we're honest with ourselves, if we're truly honest and we dig down deep enough, we find that so much of our faith is driven by fear. So much of our reality is driven by fright and fight and fear. And so there you go. We got a theology sort of based on fear, and we focus on the end times. I talked about this a few weeks ago on Easter when we talked about end times, and I gave you this phrase if you were here on Easter, and I'm sure you've all remembered it, realized eschatology. Right? You wrote that down, you remembered it, you're going to use it now whenever you can. Remember, we talked about this idea that eschatology, eschaton, the Greek word for end times, and that a lot of theology have been developed around that. But Paul Tillich, one of the progressive theologians of the 20th century, said this idea of that eschatology is actually about now, the here and now. Isaiah's prophecies were about that time that spoke. We sometimes misunderstand how prophecy is used in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. So you have Revelations being written in that context as well. And this idea of realized eschatology is this: what does it mean to be in the midst of end times? So I mentioned for you this image, this metaphor that I got from my theologian that I studied with at Bright Divinity School, Glenn Rout, when he said, do you realize at any given birth, 100 years from that birth, at any given 100-year period, 5 billion people will have lived and died in the modern era. In any given 100 years. Now, go back 2,000 years, there were not quite 3 million Jews, and probably much, much less of those could have even been fathomed by the Jewish community wherever it was. Maybe 1 million Jews, maybe 1.5 million could be even fathomed in their minds at that time. Only 3 million or less. Today, 15 million or so. In that context, you have the writing of things like, well, there'll be 12,000 left of the 12 tribes. And then we get that wonderful number that you hear recited all the time by the end times folks. When that 144,000 have been converted, that's when everything falls into place. Domino effect, and it'll all happen. And Jesus will come back, and it'll all be reestablished. That magic number. Think about the context of that reality. Reality was so small. There was a 3-layered universe. It was here. It was the underworld, Sheol, and then it was the watery heavens above. That was it. God was up there somewhere. Reality was so small. And now we're talking 5 billion people in 100 years' time come and go. We've seen such devastation, such unbelievable inhumanity in the last 100 years. Go back 300 years. Revelation was written in a time of such inhumanity in this small-scale reality. It was written around 90 plus A.D. It was written after the fall of Jerusalem, after the fall of the temple. Everyone's scattered. It was written at a time of absolute terror with a mindset of limited understanding and reality, a 3-tiered reality. So there's this understanding and this hope, this deep desire that things would change. It's always been a part of the promise and the history of the Jewish faith and of the Judeo-Christian faith. In that sense, it's quite a shocking story, and it makes sense. But then when you try to take it 2,000 years later and you try to make it make sense now, what can you take from it? I think George is correct. I do think there's a lot of really good imagery here that's important for us because it's present in Jesus' teachings. It's been present throughout the story of faith. And that is when God comes in the midst of things and surprises, when things are made new. And that's where I want to take you today. I want us to think about how is this? How is reality made new? How is the God in our midst, the mystery in whom we live? Paul's words, the ground of our very being, how is reality changed? So when I thought of Revelations, I thought of this experience, and I wanted to echo that. And I also wanted to. We walked around the grounds of Knoxville, and as we did, let's go back here. As we did, we picked up a lot of these. Some of you might remember these tracts too. I used to pick these up a lot. In fact, I used to pass them out a lot back in the day. Probably you did too, Todd. I don't. Chick tracts. Thank you. Not chick as in CHI. Not chick as in girls. Yeah, they were called. That was the name of the company. Yeah. And it's interesting because they still look like they're made in the 1960s, but they're still passing them around. And of course, they were passed around at the music festival because we were all going to hell. That was obvious. So they'd be at the doors, they would be on the sidewalks, and we would pick them up and read them and stuff. And the same sort of warning, beware, this sense of impending doom. Here's what's surprising. This is where I think we fail. And I'm jumping around here in my message. I hope I can find my way back to where I'm supposed to be. But here's the interesting thing. When you think of curiosity, when you think of faith and curiosity, one of the best images of that, of course, is Jesus. Back one. Austin, help me. I guess this thing has stopped working. Back to that one. Jesus is the perfect image of curiosity because what do you have? You have disciples sitting around him. You have disciples hanging out. You have others listening. You have this great sense of people want to know. He tells parables, turns things upside down. He's like saying, what if the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed? And everybody around him is going like, why would that be? Mustards are terrible. Mustard seeds, they take over everything. They destroy the garden. What are you talking about at the kingdom of heaven? He was constantly taking things and turning them upside down, and everyone was curious. What if? What if? What if the kingdom of heaven is like a field and you stumble on it and you want to sell everything because now you found this treasure? What do you mean? You don't stumble on the kingdom. There's 5 books. There's the whole Torah to tell us exactly what we're supposed to be. What do you mean Jesus created curiosity. But the reality is that most people who get to that place, a lot of people in faith, never leave that place. They're still stuck with the 2,000-year-old Jesus. They're not transforming. They're kind of locked in. And when you look at this picture, we sort of get locked into what we think that means. But there's an amazing story behind it. And if you're curious enough to go explore, you can find these wonderful stories, but we sort of get stuck at assumptions and never move beyond. So the guy that lives just one house over, just on the next lot over from that, his name is Adam Carson. I saw that billboard, and I was thinking about it for this sermon, and I just Googled, the amazing miracle of the internet. I Googled this billboard and came up with Adam Carson. It's not his. It was put up by the Sharon Missionary Baptist Church in 1950. And it's still there, except that now it has a commercial sign underneath it for sale. And Adam said in his blog, he said, I felt the need to talk about this because my friends always drive up and down the highway and they know I live a block away from this. And I say, of course, I love this sign. It's how I tell everybody to find my house. He said, I live just a block away from Prepare to Meet God. And he says, my mom's just 2 blocks down the highway, take the next exit once you pass that sign. He said, if they sell that property, I'm not going to know how to tell people to get to my house. But then he talked about Sharon Missionary Baptist Church, which was, now think about this, the 1950s in Arkansas, right? So we're talking the gospel here, which is entrenched in racism, which is entrenched in exclusivity and in narrow-mindedness. And now we're talking about how we need to prepare. There's so much irony in the stories that we live by, but we never get behind them. We never dig much deeper than that. But for me, that's the whole reason why curiosity is such a profound gift. Why we move forward, we reinterpret, we make sense out of things. For me to be in the midst of doubt and curiosity has only enlivened my sense of wonder and the presence of God's mystery. It's only enlivened that and opened up my attempts to understand how to relate more deeply with people in compassion. Incidentally, the word compassion and curiosity have the same roots. They both come from have a root with the word care, which means to be attentive or to be concerned. Curiosity has that same root too. So I want to think about you with you just for a minute here about this idea of curiosity. Lewis Carroll said imagination is the one true weapon. You remember Lewis Carroll who wrote Jabberwocky, wrote Alice in Wonderland? He said that imagination is the one true weapon in the fight against reality. Well, that's what curiosity is. Curiosity is that leap of faith. Is that willingness to go past? Is that willingness to think? Day before yesterday, Linda and I were in the garden, and I think you pretty much can understand that this is where we are with our reality. Oh, okay. There we go. There we go. So we were sitting at the Botanic Gardens. Beautiful day Friday. We were there early in the day. We always love to walk there. We were sitting off to the side of this log, which was kind of laying beside a trail. 2 or 3 school buses. The place was packed with kids and adults. Second graders, first graders, they were wearing their blue uniform shirts and such. And they were on like a scavenger hunt, sort of a nature outdoor kind of thing. And teacher was following them. We were sitting off to the side, and 20 kids come over to us. And we're not even there as far as they're concerned. They're looking for things. And they walk up. One kid walks up to that break right there in the log, and he shouts out, "Here's a spider!" And he starts to look at this spider, and other boys kind of run in and go, "Cool spider, cool spider." And the teacher says, "We're not looking for spiders. Look for the blueberries. It's not, spiders aren't on the list." And so they quickly turn, and they go looking for blueberries. And then they find these little berries. And then they said, "Well, here's a blueberry." Well, it was a blueberry. She says, "That's not the kind of blueberry we're looking for." And I wanted to get up and go, "Stop destroying society." I just wanted to grab her, but I understand the reality of education. I understand the demands on education, but I don't even think we realize that we ourselves drum curiosity out of our lives. Because when we get overwhelmed with life, we never go to the curious path. We always go to the destructive path, even if it's the self-destructive. What was it Elizabeth Ellis said last week? We love to entertain ideas. We throw banquets for the negative ones. We throw banquets for the disappointment. We throw banquets for self-doubt. We throw banquets for resentment. But when it comes to nourishing hope or possibility or curiosity, we give it little bits of crumbs and a little bit of water. And that's about all it gets. And I'm watching these kids basically being subjective. And they're first graders and second graders. And my 3-year-old granddaughter, who we haven't done it to her yet. And she goes to Montessori school. Maybe they won't get there. But she's, the wonder is there. What does it mean? Who knows? Is that 4-legged creature a spider? Sure. It's whatever you want it to be. And we don't, we kind of go with that wonder. We don't want to lose that wonder. And here's the interesting thing. I saw it when we first sat down, and Linda and I just waited for somebody else to see it. You see that in the background? Y'all know what it is? What do you think that is? Dark shape? Any ideas? What does it look like? Looks like a raccoon, looks like a bear, looks like a cat. My wife said it looked like a mustached old man. It was a log, right? Just a piece of driftwood. But I saw it first thing and said, "I'm taking a picture of this." And not one kid, of course, saw it. Nobody would have seen it because nobody was looking for or whatever might happen. Nobody was open to the idea of life is filled with this amazing possibility of wonder at every step. The depression I'm in right now at the moment is not the final word. It's not even close to the final word. The experience that I'm having with loss in my life, my mother's illness and the struggles she's having, she knows it as well. It's not the final word. It's painful, it's difficult, it's challenging. Now let's ask what if. Now let's play. Let's try to find a path. But it requires a leap of faith, doesn't it? I mean, if anything can be made new, it's going to require a leap of faith. And in my understanding of God, the invitation is always there. It's that leap of faith that's required. It's that willingness to cultivate curiosity as a part of our faith discipline. I love the poetry of Byron, where he talked about, and I've already left, but where he talked about the ants, And I laughed with him in the first service, and I said, "So Byron, this is when you were a kid?" And he said, "No, this was 2 months ago." He said, "I just sat down and noticed the ants crawling up the twigs. And I thought, oh my gosh, I want to be that way. I just want to be stopped." Those magical moments are always there. God is always inviting some kind of creative response. So here's what I want to offer for you to do, because we've run out of time, and I want to do 2 things. I want to give you a personal sermon illustration, lest you think that I have this all underhand and controlled. I found this book Stan, are you back there? Yeah, there you are, Stan. I found this. Stan has a house, my brother-in-law back there, he has this house out in South Colorado that's in Del Norte. There used to be this wonderful shop there called the Organic Peddler. It's basically kind of a hippie haven of organic food and curious, interesting gifts and such like that. And the woman sold it after running it for 20 years, and people would come from miles around because it had all these great, curious things. So this book was on sale. This is an amazing, beautiful, leather-bound, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings kind of bound document, right? I mean, a book. And look at these pages. And I thought, what a great book to sort of leave for posterity, you know, have my genius ideas written in there, my inspirational pictures, you know, what a great book, what an invitation. And then Jana walks in, Jana and Brad over there, where are Jana and Brad? Right back there. Jana and Brad have been involved here, visiting here, and are involved in improv, and she walks in with this Bible, which I love. So you see all the pages on the side, completely drawn all over, and then I love the pages on the inside. Let me find some here. Oh, yeah. So like that. Just drawn all over it, just pictures drawn. Laurie Simmons is always over there drawing with her iPad and creating images here, just, you know, just like that. My mother might have said when I was younger, don't do that. I'm so inspired by that. So I found this book, and I've had this book for now 8 months. And there's nothing in it. Because I'm terrified. Because whatever I put in there is not going to be good enough, right? I mean, that book deserves only the best, and it's just not going to be good enough. People will come 20 years from now and go, who was this guy that drew stick figures in this amazing book? You know? Life is beautiful. Well, yeah, okay, that's all he could come up with. So it's hard for me. I can sit behind a guitar and I can create music. It's hard for me to write lyrics because I don't believe in my lyrics a lot of times. It's hard for me to write sermons because I struggle with the words that I'm going to speak. I just want to share that with you because this whole series of finding big magic is something I think we all struggle with at different parts in our lives because we struggle with challenges. We struggle with faith. We struggle with our purpose and our meaning. We struggle with doubt. DeAndrea had you all fill out some cards, and a bunch of you came back with cards. All of these amazing doubts, which I completely understood in so many facets of our lives. But doubt is an invitation to curiosity. It's not a bottom line, that's the end, it's a wall, how do I get through it? It's an invitation to curiosity. So with you, I'm pledging for the next 4 or 5 weeks to be not simply creative and come up with masterpieces, but just to go where I wouldn't go before. And maybe to even question what I've doubted before. And maybe to even stop and engage with a person a little more than I would before. Just allow curiosity to drive it. And I was inspired because at the hospital, I blogged about this. I read to my mom who's been in the hospital. She's doing better. She's stable and back in the state and on the 3rd floor, so full care still, but she's better. But she was really having a hard day, and I was looking up material for this sermon, and I came across Lewis Carroll. And I read the Jabberwocky. How many of you know Jabberwocky? Right? You remember Jabberwocky and Lewis Carroll's crazy language and whatnot? And I read it to her, and she just started laughing. The first time she'd been laughing in days, she just started laughing at the nonsensical language. And it inspired me. So I went home. I want to end with this poem because it represents for me all of those moments, which are Icarus-like moments, right? They're like moments that give us that chance to move beyond where we are. Who knows what will happen? But we move. So pay attention and forgive me, but I'm going to try to do my best to be Lewis Carroll here. It's called Resurrection After Icarus. Band, y'all can come on up while I'm doing that. Resurrected After Icarus for Lewis Carroll. Then twineth upon he the hour clonfibbed to urge, to move toward. So moth-flung, wing-warped, sunward, throughward, he flabjasted and bemouthed, unsated and breathless, did rise to breach the glad jorb, and to traffle the fibrous feet. Freesome and curious, he did swoth and wang flew, testing the opticlad sky, whittled and blue, and there golden, bright jorb sat trued. Then he, short-strifed, sudden blanded, inhumitably, the treadleless grip, now flap-free and stranded, let slip, and spun lossward, throughward, a shrill leaf flow, diswinged, he, by the gregrumptuous bright glow, now lay swathed in loathed, swelled mudge below. Failed? Fallen born? Oh, quisitive of the frab-jabbed future. False-faced and friends led by fright and flight and fight? Not then, nor evermore. For to have tried, and left the floor.